Welcome to the Thrive on Mission podcast. I am Dave Jones, and Jim Book, as always, is with us here. Jim, in this episode, we're going to wrap up really the series that we started a number of weeks ago related to the silent killers that are at work within churches that kill joy, kill momentum, become attitudes of defeatism, and just don't allow churches to move forward on mission.
Right.
And what God has called them to do. And last episode, we talked about comparison and criticism and how those things steal joy and momentum. And we're going to wrap it up today talking about seeking approval and how that kills authenticity in a preacher, in the elders, and in the church. And so that idea then of just truly seeking to be authentic in the work that we're doing in the Lord's church. And as we wrap this up, Jim, what do you mean when we talk about this last silent killer?
You know, preachers, whether they want to admit it or not, can be some of the most insecure people in the world. And I'll tell you why. And Dave, you are still preaching every week in the local church. So you're in the trenches every week. I've retired from the local ministry, but one reason why I realized why even strong preachers, I mean, guys that look like they got it together, and they do. A lot of guys have to. But one reason why, if you were to just dig deep into their heart and their minds, you'd find a lot of insecurity. But let's ask why. You have to stand in front of hundreds of people every week. You have 27 and a half minutes to challenge seasoned saints, people who've only been a Christian for 3 days, people who tend to vote left to center, right to center, people who are of color or not of color, people who have a lot of money, people who have two nickels rubbed together, people who have a home, people who live on the streets. You have 27 and a half minutes to reach them and empower them and encourage them and make them want to come back the next week. And after that's done, you got to make sure there's enough money that was collected in the plates to pay for the bills. Then you have an elders meeting Sunday night at 6 o'clock after the evening service that you hope people come and attend. And then you got to pray that you get through that elders meeting without having a challenge or a difficulty. And guess what? You get to do it again in 6 days.
You make the ministry sound so easy, Jim.
Why do you think the preachers are all on medicine? I mean, that's a tough job. That's tough. And any preacher says, that's nothing, he's lying. Now, I'm not trying to create a crisis that doesn't exist, but any preacher that will tell you that he doesn't sometimes look at the responsibility. I'm responsible for these souls, not completely. The Bible says, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. But look, Dave, your job is to make sure the folks at Millwood are fed, at least from your perspective. Okay. So if we fail in that, then we got to answer to God for that. That's a lot of pressure. So yeah, if sometimes you see your preacher walking down the hallway and he's twitching, or he's talking to himself, it may be because of the pressure of his job is real, and it is real. But I just look, I'm going to tell you, it's not for everybody, and so insecurities can creep in. I'm not going to lie to you. I knew there were times if our offerings were down, I wondered what could I have said differently during the sermon to make that not happen. If someone didn't come forward to be baptized, why was my invitation so weak? If everybody didn't walk out crying after the sermon, then I didn't put enough time in. If someone left the church, oh my goodness, someone left to go to a sister Christian church. What did I do wrong? Did I not shepherd them enough? Did I not call on them? All right. So the point is no to all of that. But over years, those challenges and that pressure can build up and create immense insecurity. Now, it doesn't need to happen, and it shouldn't happen, but let's don't kid ourselves. It very well could.
Yeah. You mentioned the pressure that preachers are under. I heard a story of a preacher who went to a home of a new couple in the church, knocked on the door. It was summertime. The screen door was open, and their 4-year-old daughter came to the door, saw that it was the preacher, turns around and yells to the mom in the kitchen, "Mom, the pressure's here."
Yeah,
And
she
that's
gets it.
it is a pressure-filled environment being in ministry at times. You quoted, I think it was last episode, you quoted Bob Russell, who makes the statement that we preach to an audience of one, and that may be true. We ultimately want to please the Lord. We want to preach his word, focus on what he wants us to focus on. So in one sense, yeah, we're preaching to an audience of one, but there happens to be a few dozen or hundreds that are listening in.
Exactly.
And they
Exactly.
talk back and they talk
Yes.
to each other,
Yes.
and some of them
Yes.
even have roast preacher for lunch. You've heard that statement before.
Absolutely. And after a while, if a preacher isn't strong and he's not feeding his own spiritual center, those pressures can weigh on him. Now, there are numerous ways that God has given his spokesman to protect themselves and to insulate themselves, even from the Sanballats that we mentioned last week, or the fighting widows in Acts 6. Not every story has to end poorly. Not every preacher has to walk out with his head on fire, and not every preacher has to be fired. Not every preacher has to fight with his elders. I used to joke, to I my at my retirement party, I said, I've been preaching for 30 years and I've never worked a day in my life. Because I didn't think of it as work, because I wouldn't allow myself that. I trained myself not to think of it as work. So I would just challenge preachers. Hey, look, the pressure's on. It's real. Don't kid yourself. Don't be cavalier. Don't pretend that you're bigger than you are. But you're not by yourself. And nobody wants you as a good preacher to succeed more than Jesus. I keep reminding myself, I want this church to succeed. And Jesus would tap me on the shoulder and go, "Book, I got news for you. I want it to do better and succeed more than you do, because I paid a price for it that you didn't." So we got a lot going for us, but don't kid yourself. Sunday mornings, they're tough. David, I didn't sleep on a Saturday night. I didn't sleep for 30 years on a Saturday night. I'd wake up at 3 in the morning with point number three going, "That's terrible. That illustration's got to come out." I never have slept better all my life on a Saturday night as soon as I retired. But it's just the reality of, man, a lot of pressure when you're the evangelist, the lead evangelist. That's a tough job, but it's a great job. But
Yeah.
it's tough. Don't let anybody kid you.
Jim, I don't know many preachers, if any, to be honest with you, that are intentionally antagonistic. Most of the preachers I know want to stand firm on the truth, be declarative in what they say, emphatic, and make sure that people understand that this is the will of God. So there is some natural offense that happens in the midst
Yes.
of that. But then there's times, and recently, a member of our community who is very familiar with our church here has become very vocal in her opposition to some of the things we stand for as a church. And I have a very sensitive spirit, and it hurts my feelings, and I
True.
wish it wasn't that way. And what I tend to do at times is I begin to question everything I put on Facebook now, and I become gun shy with certain things. There's been times maybe in a preacher's ministry where every time he goes to the elders meeting, they're being critical of something that he has said, or he knows that people in the church feel a certain way. So where do we draw the line in making sure you're not causing unnecessary offense and drawing criticism to yourself and really standing for the truth? How do you do that effectively?
Well, I don't know which preacher it was that said it, and I think, David, probably you and I have used the line. I've always believed if we lead with grace and land with truth, we can't go wrong. We might be misinterpreted. They still might hate us. But man, I think when you walk through the gate and you're just leading with grace and then you get to truth, a lot of times preachers fail to show the goodness of God first. And by not showing the goodness of God, there's no appetite for people to and bring God into their life. But if we can show them the goodness of God first, I think we create an appetite for Christianity, for faith, for baptism. So there is a fine line. And so, David, and anybody who knows me knows I was probably one of the most outspoken conservative preachers in Central Florida.
Can't imagine
Um,
that.
I know you can't. We did some crazy bold things. We did faith and freedom rallies at our church. The United States Senator from Florida was on my property. And I had an opportunity to stand in front of him and political leaders that packed our gym out and talk about how our faith in Christ and our freedom coincide. Now, I know this. there were people in my church that really struggled, that the political the energy had worked its way into the property. There were, that we were encouraging political leaders to be there. But I also knew for every critic, there are dozens that are appreciative of the fact that, hey, there's a man in the clergy in this county that understands responsible citizenship begins with a Christian being a steward of his freedom. And but what it did is expose all these people to the Christian church, to us. And so we end up baptizing people from these events. Crazy. But and I knew my elders. I sometimes wondered if they, if they weren't secretly, praying, Jim, cool it. But they were always so supportive, and not all of them attended, but they were very supportive. But I made it very clear that this is who I am. And in both churches that I serve, I said, if you hire me, you need to know exactly what you're getting. And especially Kissimmee, because they had 17 years to see it. David, I remember one time we did a marriage seminar at my church at Winter Park, and the LGBTQ community got so offended because it was a marriage seminar and we were defining marriage biblically, that we had 15 transvestites protesting in front of the church on a Sunday. Well, that doesn't do much for Friend Day. I could tell you that right now. And so it was a time bomb, and our elders were like, what are we going to do? And I said, we're going to go through with this because fear isn't going to dictate this church. And if we allow fear to stop us, we will send the message to this congregation that we're only going to stand for truth if it's comfortable and convenient. I said, we're going to have this seminar. Well, here comes the television cameras and all kinds of nonsense. But we got through it, and we were a stronger church. The funny thing was, Dave, I had already been hired at Kissimmee to start a month later. And I said to Jeanette, if the elders are watching the news and they're seeing these protesters outside the church, they may go, no way we won book here. But that was a challenge. I mean, but I had to realize, okay, we have some enemies that hate truth, but we're going to continue to stand up for righteousness, and we're not going to let the sand ballots and the left control the narrative, not at this church. And God blessed us.
That's great. Jim, not many people know this story that I'm about to share, and I think you do remember it, but you were preaching a revival here at Millwood, and you made a truth statement in the midst of your sermon as it relates to all lives matter.
Yes.
We had a couple of young women here who took offense to that,
Yeah. Yeah.
and it probably one of the most special things in my ministry, it's definitely a top 10 moment, is when, first of all, those two young women were willing to go and talk to you.
Sure.
That said a lot about their faith and their character.
Sure.
And then secondly, you were willing to sit down and listen to them and communicate with them as to why you said what you said and your context, especially coming out of Kissimmee, and the way that they perceived it was wrong. And in the end, I think the three of you prayed together.
Yes.
And
Yes.
what a special moment that you can stand for truth. You can disagree with people, but in the end, you can still pray with them. And I thought that
Yes.
was just a great testimony to me, to those girls, and to others in the church that saw it. And there weren't many that did. And we didn't make a show of it, and you didn't say anything about it later. But I was really honored to have a chance to see something.
Well, and it was great that they came forward, because I think what we need to do was just present some clarity. And the only way to do that is to, when two groups of people, two Christians, three Christians, can come together and reason together.
Yeah.
And then when we reason together, I think we leave in a favorable fashion. But it doesn't mean we have to be disagreeable. And sometimes, if we fail to lead with grace, they may never hear truth. Now, I'm not holding myself up as an example how to do it, but these were things that happened in my ministry that I will always look back on and go, man, that was a God thing. And so it just reminded me, Jim, you gotta watch for these opportunities. They happen all the time. You just got to make sure you're seeing them.
The whole idea of seeking approval from people runs contrary to God's will for us, and that we're ultimately to seek His approval. And I think one of the things that encouraged me was the support that you've had from the elders in your churches over the years. And I think that's really, really important. And even if you're stepping out in areas that they're not totally comfortable with,
Yes.
like they've got your back. I know the elders at Millwood have had my back over the years. But for some preachers out there, it seems that they feel their job is to have the elders' backs all the time,
Yeah.
and that they have to do everything according to what the elders want them to do. So they, as a preacher, maybe aren't setting an agenda for their ministry or the church. They're sort of standing in the background waiting for the elders to take lead. And I think there's a misguided approach to polity within our churches sometimes. And it's defined usually as an elder-led church. And some preachers and elders take that basically to mean that the preacher or the evangelist is a hireling.
Right.
And if he happens to disagree with them, he can leave.
Yeah.
So, where's that balance between working with a leadership team that includes elders versus being an evangelist who leads biblically?
So I asked someone the other day, I said, what's more important, breathing in or breathing out? And they're like, I said, exactly. I view the role of the evangelist as important as the shepherd, because I'm telling you, great shepherd, lousy evangelist, dead church. Strong evangelist, poor shepherds, dead church. You cannot operate without both of them. And when the elders realize that we need to love the evangelist and we need to encourage him. We need to pay him well. We need to treat him with respect. We need to fuel his fire as often as we can. What the elders need to realize, the more you do that, the better your church that you shepherd is going to be. Now, for the evangelist, what is the writer? Is it Hebrews? Don't go out of your way to make their job more miserable than it could possibly be. Now, that's a paraphrase.
Yeah, yeah.
I just challenge the evangelist, man, work with these guys and realize there's two separate offices, but it doesn't mean their office is more important. And I think for years I believed that. I mean, I used to say the role of the shepherd is the most important office in the church. And it never says that. It says it's important, but you can't have a good church without an evangelist, and so that's one thing I love about this Mission 120 thing. Mission 120 is about church growth, but what we're kind of encouraging the evangelists to do is, all right, look, we need you to hyper focus on meeting those new people that are coming in, kind of courting them through the membership class, because they're age, familiar, they're more familiar with you. Proximity determines impact. So you've had the greatest impact on their life because you're closest to them. They see you on stage. You're in the foyer shaking their hand when they walk out. You're the first guy they see. Most preachers are welcome to come in. All right. Most people don't know who the elders are, and that's okay, but they know who the preacher is. All right. So once we get them through the membership class, they're baptized. Now they're ready to go to work. Now the elder needs to be there. I jokingly said the elder needs to be standing there with a towel, helping them dry off and give them a big hug and say, you don't know me, but I'm your shepherd. And I'm going to be your shepherd till Jesus comes back or till you die. And we're going to go to Sunday school together. If you've got lunch plans, cancel them. My wife and I want to take you to lunch. Now, all of a sudden, the shepherd, he's retaining the evangelist, he's recruiting, but everybody's growing the church. And all of a sudden now the elders are like, good grief, we wouldn't have had these baptisms had the evangelist not been on fire. The evangelist is going, you know what? We've kept these people because you guys are great shepherds. Who's more important? They're both essentially important. I don't need your job. I love what my role as evangelist is pretty powerful. It's pretty special. When I got to Kissimmee, one of the chairman of the elders said to me, he said, Jim, would you like to be an elder? And we had 8 at the time. And I said, you know what? I love being the preacher. And I said, I have so much responsibility. I carry so much, and I'm going to say this with respect, power, and not in a negative way. I said, guys, I don't need any more responsibility than what I already have. You guys have given me so much room to run. You've given me so much authority. You've given me so many things to develop and dreams and vision to cast. I quite frankly, I'm not jealous of your position. You guys, I love you, and your role is huge. But evangelist, that's pretty special role too. And I'm happy where I am, and I never needed that off. I never wanted to be an elder. I because I always felt the evangelist had plenty of responsibility.
Like you, Jim, I've always felt respected by our elders. Early on, I had to build some trust over time,
Sure.
of course, and we developed in our relationship, myself and the elders we've had here over the years. And I love the approach that our elders have taken with certain things. And most recently, in one of our meetings, we're working through a change that might cause a little bit of questions and controversy. And we asked the question, what do we do if people come and ask, why are we doing this? And the one elder responded and he says, have them come talk to us. And
Yeah.
so they're willing to take the heat as
Wow.
necessary. And I think those kinds of qualities are good. But not every guy, not every preacher is in that kind of situation. So as you travel around and you see these different preachers in churches, maybe that are a little more uh, elder heavy, if you will, as far as domineering leadership in an unhealthy way, what kind of counsel are you giving to guys as you travel around?
So I will tell you, Dave, I think one reason why a lot of guys don't want to go into preaching is because they have witnessed such hostility between elders and evangelists and vice versa. And they're like, I don't want to put myself through that. I know one preacher who specifically has a secular job. And I said, well, if your church continues to grow, can you work yourself out of that? And here's what he told me. He goes, I'm deathly afraid that if the eldership at this church goes haywire, I won't have a way of feeding my family. So I
Mhm.
feel like I got to keep the secular job as a safety net. That's that we've got to stop that. That's unhealthy. Okay. Why can't the evangelist and the elders work together harmoniously? I mean, is it that impossible? Paul wept. He wept when he left the Ephesian elders. He spent more time in Ephesus and he wept. I'm thinking to myself, okay, he's the evangelist, he's the church planner. He's weeping. Why? Because one of them ran over his foot? No, because he loved them. Well, why can't we love our elders? Why? But we can't. We have to. And you're blessed, Dave. You have great elders. And I tell you, I talk to my elders almost weekly from either one or the other church still, because we had that relationship. But we made ourselves do it. We forced ourselves not to become hateful. Okay, and
Yeah,
walk out of that meeting in agreement.
and we talked on a previous episode that those are relationships we have to invest in. They just don't happen.
Absolutely.
And that you've got to work at it. It's got to be a priority on both sides. And so the idea then of seeking approval kills authenticity. Certainly, we are seeking the approval of God from an authentic standpoint. For the elders, let's say, that have a preacher that isn't quite stepping up, that he seems to always be seeking approval from others and maybe even them, what kind of counsel would you give to an elder who isn't in a good working relationship with the preacher and what he might do to coach that preacher along?
Great question. What I have found a lot of times is the preacher isn't exactly sure of what he's allowed to do because it was never clarified. I had a preacher call me and say, I'm really frustrated. The elders are casting no vision at this church. And I said, can I give you a hint? I know that church real well. I know those elders real well. They actually look to the evangelist to cast the vision and then come to them with an incredible plan and then discuss it, work through the details, and then implement it. I said, you didn't know that? He goes, I'm waiting on them to cast the vision, and then I'm going to jump on board. I said, brother, that's why they're frustrated with you. And he lasted about 6 more months and he was gone. Now, somehow, either the elders failed to clarify that with him or he failed to get his role completely clarified. I know that when I went to Kissimmee, they had put a steering committee together for a 10-year vision plan. And when I got there, I respectfully asked the elders to table that vision plan, not because those people did not mean well, not because they didn't put a lot of time and effort in it. I said, let me just tell you something, guys. You hired an evangelist, good, bad, or indifferent. I come with a massive vision plan. Okay. And if you'll allow me to work with you we can put this church into overdrive because I've already got a plan. And with the Lord's help, man, these guys were incredible. I remember, I remember when the elders decided that they wanted to implement a masks policy at 9:30 service, and I was vehemently opposed to mandatory masks at any service. I just thought it was a mistake. And I'm telling you, this thing almost really caused dissension. And this was one of the only meetings, Dave, they asked the preacher to stay out of and all the staff. And chairman called me up and said, we've reached a conclusion, mandatory mask at 9:30, optional at 11. And I said, I want you to know, I think it should be optional every service, but if that's what you want, you're the elders. And he said, Jim, we want you to make the announcement. So I went home and I was like, well, Jeanette, you're not going to believe this. This is what the guys decided. And they want me to make the announcement. And Jeanette goes, I think you should call the chairman and go, I can't make that announcement. I don't agree with it. I said, you know what, Jeanette? It's not my place to agree with it. They're the elders. And I said, what example would I be as the preacher if I kicked and screamed? I said, I hate doing it because I think it could, I just know how some of our people are about this whole mask thing. And so, I, I, I concluded the service and I said, I need everybody to have a seat. And when the preacher says, everyone have a seat at the end, one or two things are about ready to happen. Okay. And one of them is the preacher's getting ready to leave. Okay. Or we've got some moral failure that's happened. Okay. So of course they all sit down and I said, I need to share something with you. And then I said, Jeanette and I have been married for 35 years, and we are considering splitting up. Just kidding. The elders want you to wear a mask at 9:30 starting next Sunday. See you all next week. Okay. So I didn't
That's
actually
strong.
do that, but I told the staff I was, and they thought that was hilarious. So I sat them down and I said, hey, I know where we are politically on this issue, but our elders feel very strongly that there are a lot of people that would come back earlier if they felt safer. And so, because we run multiple services, they're asking us to wear a mask throughout the 9:30 service. Now, I said, I want you to know something. As the evangelist, I don't agree with this decision. But I said, I, as your evangelist, am asking you to follow the direct orders that these men have asked us to do because ultimately they have been given the responsibility of leading this church. And not one person acted up.
Jim, in Acts chapter 4 and 5, we see the apostles getting in trouble with the local authorities and, in a nutshell, making a statement, we're going to obey God and not you.
Yes.
And I know a lot of preachers that are very hard line on many topics, many issues. And when they get in the pulpit, their attitude almost seems to be, I don't care what anybody in this church thinks or feels. It's what God says, and that's what we're going to do. And so there's almost this hostility toward people because they think they're honoring God in
Yeah.
that. But then there are others who are so concerned with what the people think, they become people pleasers, and they know what God says, but they avoid certain topics so as not to cause offense, when maybe offense is exactly what needs to be given.
Absolutely.
So obviously we could go extreme on either end with this whole topic. Where is the middle ground in honoring God and still understanding the people we're preaching to and serving, and understanding where they're at on an issue and helping them to mature to the point where God would want them to be?
All right. One thing that I always did, if I knew I was getting ready to hit a hot topic, I mean, one that could divide the church, usually it had a political thread that ran through it. Even if it really wasn't a political issue, it had been politicized. I would psychologically get to that point in my sermon and I would stop. I would pull up a chair. I would set it next to the pulpit and I would sit and I would pause for about 5 seconds. And then I would say this: what I'm about ready to say is extraordinarily uncomfortable. I have thought a million times of ways to not say this because I know how divisive it could be. But I said, I have to answer to higher authority. And I said, I don't think you came here to hear a preacher that would only say what you wanted to hear, not what you needed. So get ready, because what I'm going to say is out of love. But I said, if you leave, please know I thought about you before I said it, and I hope you don't. And then I would say it. And I didn't take long. And I wasn't very verbose. I didn't bloviate. And once I got done, I stood up, moved the chair, got back behind the pulpit, and got back on track. Now, psychologically, what that did is it told them, this is killing Jim to say. Number two, it took guts to do that because he told us ahead of time he would prefer to sidestep this. Number three, this preacher actually cares enough to potentially hurt us in order to feed us. How can we go wrong? Versus, I'm just going to sidestep every issue that's controversial because I don't have the guts to say it. Now, there's a way to say things and a way not to. And I've just challenged preachers. It's not what you're saying, it's how you say it. You
Yeah.
get 100, you get an A+ on what you say. You get a D on how you said it.
Jim, that's so good. And I think one thing that you really highlight there's the authenticity of your personal struggle with it. And two other things that I've observed that I try to do in similar situations is number one, when you're warning people about hell, I never want to make it seem like I actually want them to go there.
Yes, thank you.
Heaven's the better option. And this is why we're talking about this, because I don't want you there. I want you here kind of thing. And then the last thing I would note is at times injecting some humor in those difficult moments are good. It sort of
Yes,
breaks down some walls. You get people laughing, they relax a little bit. And I heard one preacher say one time, when you get people to laugh, it opens their heart to hard
yes,
truth. And so
absolutely.
that's some wisdom that maybe I've picked up over the years as well. Well, Jim, I think this has been a very valuable discussion. I think it's so
Oh, it's been
important for us
great.
to always stand on the side of God. And while we always love people and we want to honor people, we want to honor the elders and their position, that does not supersede what God has designed for people's lives and for order in the church.
Right,
I hope this
right.
idea then of seeking the approval of God above the approval of people is always going to remind us that if we don't do that, we're killing authenticity, and God's
Absolutely.
requiring authenticity
Yeah.
from all of us.
And just don't think more highly of yourself. You're human, and remind the church of that frequently. They know it, but just let them know. And you know what, Dave, real quick, sometimes not self-deprecating, that can be dangerous. But when you remind the church that, hey, man, I want you to know we're all going to walk out of here today. We're going to struggle with something. I'm right there with you. It humanizes the preacher. And that reminds the people, if my preacher struggles with whatever, man, that means there's hope for all of us. And, I used to ask Jeanette, I said, Jeanette, how many great preachers do you think there are in the Restoration Movement? She would say, probably one less than you're thinking, Jim. So she would always keep me level, one less than you think, Jim. And she was thinking of me. So, hey, it's just enjoy ministry, enjoy it. And because really it is the greatest job in the world.